16 tips that you need to know about the new Madden 22 franchise scouting update. Let's get into it. Tip number 1, you want to set up your scouts at the beginning of the preseason based on team needs. At this point, you can hire and assign scouts. You've got the entire preseason to do this, and there are no changes in the scouts that are available for you to hire. So really no rush here, but you do want to make sure that your tier 3 scout should be placed at the national level. Tip number 2, you get to choose a draft class just like previously, and this starts at week 1. You get access to the entire list of the top 450 prospects and a region breakdown. During this time, you want to check the strengths and weaknesses of each region and find a scout that's proficient in targeting the strength of that region. Now, strengths and weaknesses are just an overview. This doesn't mean that there are no good players at a certain position in that region, but it's just an idea that there are very few of them at that position in that region. Tip number 3, you get to choose a regional scouting focus at the start of week 2. It's important to choose a scouting focus that aligns with the scout's area of expertise and that region's strengths. At this point, you want to start to look at players' notes and their attributes. You also want to see what other teams are looking at those certain positions. You can also see the ratings under the physical tab and core attributes under the skills tab. Now just remember that this is final, so whenever you do decide to choose a regional scouting focus, you can't change it back. Tip number 4, you get to view mock drafts at 5 different points during the season. The first one being at week 3, the second being at week 8, the third one being at the re-signing period of the offseason, the fourth one being at week 2 of free agency, and the fifth one being at week 4 of free agency. Tip number 5, make sure to check your draft stories throughout the year to keep up to date with potential prospects that you might want to sign. Now, not every player that has a draft story is going to be a great player, so make sure that you actually do your research on every player listed there. Tip number 6, every few weeks, a player's completion percentage goes up a certain amount, and this is all dependent on the type of scout that is scouting them. A tier 3 scout is going to raise their completion percentage up higher than a tier 1. This is important because this unlocks attribute traits that you can view, which are very specific to each player and the position that they are at. Tip number 7, week 6, you get a scenario about an upcoming prospect that you should target. Now, just like draft stories, this doesn't always mean that a player is great, but you just want to make sure that you look at that player before drafting them because there is a really good chance that they're a good diamond in the rough. Tip number 8 is that letter grades are not defined by skills in comparison to the NFL, only to other rookies in the draft class. So that's very important to remember. Just because someone has a letter A grade at speed doesn't mean that they're going to be a 95 to 99 overall speed. That just means that they have an A speed when compared to the rest of the draft class. Tip number 9 is that scouting other players passively will only progress them as high as 40%. So if you do not have a scout attached to a certain position group, there is a passive scouting system in place, but it will only go up as high as 40%. Tip number 10, every 10% that is scouted results in a core attribute being unlocked for that player. Tip number 11, week 8 gives you the option to focus at the national level. So again, this is very important. You want to look at what is the tier 3 scout strength and make sure you're scouting that position group. Tip number 12, attributes seem to be unlocked at random. There's really no way of controlling this. So you might get lucky and unlock everything that's very important for your player, or there might be a key attribute that is locked and really change whether you are going to draft that player or not. Tip number 13, in week 11, you are able to focus scout 3 specific players. Now, before I say anything else about this, please make sure that you select the 3 players before exiting out of this screen, because if you do exit out without selecting your 3 players, you lose the ability to scout these 3 players. Now, this is crucial because this will actually bump up the completion percentage to which that player has been scouted. It's a good way of determining whether a player is worth drafting or not. Tip number 14, at 80% completion, you get to see a player's archetype and what type of player that they are. Very important if they are going to be the right scheme fit for you and your team. Tip number 15, off-season free agency week 1 and 2 show you the combine and college pro day results. This gives you 2 different depictions of the player's athletic abilities so that you can gain a little bit more insight on what type of player they really are. And tip number 16, you get private workouts that happen during week 3 of free agency, and these uncover even more than focus scouting that we mentioned earlier. You roughly get a 5 to 10% increase on the scouting depending on the scout's tier level. So there you go. There are 16 tips that will help you become a better GM, and hopefully just like me, you will get the best player in the draft. I'll catch everybody later.